Hello and welcome to Geek Warning, the podcast that puts the world's most interesting cycling tech into one place. I'm Dave Rome, and before we jump into the episode this week, there are some things to tell. Firstly, I'd like to apologize to regular listeners of Geek Warning podcast. We've had a lot of changes over the past few months, and I know it can be tough to keep up with. And I'm sorry to say, but we're not quite settled on what those changes are just yet. As teased last week, Ask a Wrench, which sits at the end of our episodes, is going members only. That means you'll need to be on our member feed to hear that part of the podcast. By now, you'll know that Escape is wholly funded by its members and that we have monthly and annual memberships. I'll share those details on how to access the member feed a bit later when we get to Ask a Wrench. Additionally, there are some changes to the voices you're going to hear. Our UK-based tech writers, Suvi Loponen and Alex Hunt, will jump on occasionally, but won't be here every episode. Rather, Suvi will soon begin a new podcast series, an expansion to the Geek Warning channel that investigates industry-related themes. Meanwhile, you'll also hear Alex and Suvi on an upcoming and reoccurring special episode where we'll catch up on the bikes and gear we've been testing. So with that, let me tell you who is joining us this week. Ronan McLaughlin, how are you doing?
I'm good. I thought you were just going to take the entire episode there and give me the night off, but
it did start to feel that way.
And I'm good.
Good. And welcoming a new voice who is very much an old voice to loyal listeners of the podcast, Mr. Zach Edwards of Boulder Groupetto. How are you doing?
Hello. Yeah, it's been a hot minute.
It has been a while. Welcome back.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Very good. You're telling me that your peak. It's peak winter for you at the moment, but you're flat out busy working on bikes. What's going on?
I don't really know. Lots of people still riding, I guess. Kind of annoying to be so busy, but also a good problem to have.
Yeah, right. Okay. Oh, well, welcome. And also joining us, we'll have a fourth voice later in the episode. Brad Copeland will be on to answer the Ask a Wrench questions from our members. But for now, well, that was a lot. All right, let's jump into the big topic for this week. Ronan, you just published an article kind of looking back at the UCI rules that got introduced in 2020. It's something we wrote about back at Cycling Tips days. And I guess, yeah, for you, like a lot of the new aero bikes that are coming to market now are based on these rules. And I guess you wanted a piece that you could reference and sort of point back to and remind people what those rule changes were. Can you give us, in a bit of a nutshell, like what are some of the big changes that came out a few years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's like every time we see a new bike release these days, we hear that same phrase rolled out. This is made possible by that frame design regulation relaxation that the UCI had. It was voted on in September 2020, but came into effect 1st of January 2021. Yep. And I quite often found myself kind of wondering, you know, I was vaguely aware of what changed because I was sort of following at the time, but not exactly familiar with every rule change and that. And so I kind of set about, first of all, trying to understand what exactly did change, and then got to a certain point where it's like, you know what, you should probably write this into an article and publish it on that Escape Collective website because other people might be asking the same question.
Yes, very much so. With that, what are some of those changes?
That's kind of what I learned, was that to answer what changed in 2021, you have to go back to 1996, believe it or not, because there was the Lugano Charter, which was the UCI's sort of first concerted attempt to like halt the progress and the innovation that was coming out of the cycling industry. And that introduced things like the 6.8 kilogram minimum weight limit. That started in 1996. Again, voted on 1996, full effect as of the year 2000, but other things like the 3-to-1 aspect ratio, that, you know, the width of a tube compared to the length of a tube, that was introduced then. And then other things like the commercialization rule, 2 wheels had to be the same size. They explicitly banned recumbents, which I think we all agree is probably, recumbents are great. They're just not the type of bike racing that we participate in, or at least not most often.
Sure.
And so then fast forward to 2020, basically what happened was the first significant update to those 1996 rules. There'd been little tweaks in between, but this was the first mass upheaval. And I guess the main things that changed were that 3-to-1 aspect ratio was relaxed. It became 8-to-1. There were the limit or the minimum tube width of 25 millimeters was reduced to 10 millimeters, meaning things like down tubes, head tubes, seat tubes and all could now be 10 millimeters. Forks and seat stays could already be that thin. And they also permitted things like compensation triangles on road frames rather than just the time trial frames that they previously existed on.
Hang on, what's a compensation triangle?
It's all to do with pyramids in Egypt and stuff.
Yeah, gotcha. Cool. Makes sense. Moving on.
No, it's basically if you think about the inside of the front triangle of the frame, like behind the head tube connecting the down tube and the top tube, that little filled in area that you see in so many time trial or aero frames these days. And also, like, if you imagine the connection between the underside of the top tube and the inside of the seat tube, that little area there, the UCI let manufacturers start sort of filling that in, which does provide a bit of an aerodynamic gain, also provides you a nice, neat option somewhere new to put the seat post clamp, but it's mostly like an aerodynamic gain that previously wasn't possible. And I mean, like all the rule changes, not all the rule changes, because surprise, surprise, it's not entirely clear with the UCI what exactly they did change and what they didn't. But I've gone through what we do know as part of that change from 2021. It's on the website. I think the key takeaway is that manufacturers were, up to this point, they had sort of complaints that the rules as they were prior to this update were too restricting. They meant that they couldn't make the bikes more aerodynamic for the pros to make them faster, and they also couldn't make them more compliant for the average consumer who might benefit from some added compliance. And so these rules were pressed for, introduced, and they seemed like a win-win for everybody involved.
Yeah, I mean, I guess where that came from is when the Laguna Charter was made, I guess it was sort of, carbon fiber was around. It had been around for more than a decade, but it was still kind of in its infancy, right? Like the CAD modeling and the finite element analysis and all these tools were still kind of rudimentary, and they've really come up in the last few years where, I guess what they could do with composites and all that had really surpassed what they were allowed to do in the shaping of tubes. So that's, I think, where a lot of the pressure came from was, I think technology had sort of surpassed the limitations of the rules. But the big one that for me stood out was they introduced sort of like a single UCI approval list for like cyclocross, road, and if I'm not mistaken, time trial frames. Was it all in one? Like you can use each of those frames in any of the events?
Sort of. In that prior to 2021, manufacturers had to have their frames approved under the specific discipline they were intended for. After that, the UCI just introduced instead of having the specific discipline, they could just be approved for all disciplines. But that doesn't really mean that you are approved for using a time trial bike in a road race. There are mass participation events for which a bike is approved for, and there are individual events. So a time trial bike with flat handlebars and time trial extensions is in a single or an individual discipline. And so although it has the same approval process, which makes it much easier for manufacturers to get frames approved, it doesn't mean we can go riding time trial bikes in mass start events.
But in theory, if you got a time trial frame and you put drop bars on it, and while the geometry would be just terrible, you could actually then use that in a mass participation event.
I'll give you everything but the terrible geometry.
Okay, all right. Terrible geometry once you put a drop bar on it is what I meant. But anyway.
I'm not giving you that.
Okay, all right. Moving on. All right, Ren. So 2020/21, start of 21 timeline. It takes a while for the R&D and the development cycle. Like it seems like we're now kind of there as far as brands actually using these new updated rules.
Yeah, I mean, like we had heard hints of it. Almost within 6 months, we started hearing hints of this bike was designed under the new rules. It didn't really happen or we didn't at least see the full extent of it until like August 2023, when frames to be used in the track events at the Paris Olympics had to be used by, and so we seen it at that Glasgow World Championships in that year. A lot of the track frames that came out then were only possible thanks to this frame design relaxation. And I think it still sort of went unnoticed on the road. You really had to know what to look for to spot the changes, and we went through some of them on the article until Colnago brought out that Y1RS before Christmas, and with that offset seat post, let's call it, it immediately became clear, oh, this is only possible because of the new regulations.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think the reasoning behind that is like twofold. Is first of all, the biggest brands all have design cycles. When the UCI made this rule change, they would have been already committed to previous designs. But then also there's just a whole technical challenge behind it that I get into in the article as well. It's like you can make a frame thinner and more aerodynamic and lighter and all these things, but making it with those characteristics and still having it have the right stiffness profile and ride nice, and that's an entirely different challenge. And I think the temptation would have been there to just make everything as narrow and as aero as possible, but the result might have been, well, let's just say the wind tunnel results might have hidden what would have been a pretty terrible bike beneath that. And I think that whole learning process slowed things down a bit as well.
I guess at the World Tour level, will this see the time of teams having two separate bikes for everyone come back? Because everyone did the one bike to do everything, because at the time, a few years ago, aero bikes were 8+ kilos and people didn't want to ride that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're 100% there, Zach. It's and what I do think you will see the return of now, and in an even bigger way, I've already mentioned this podcast previously, is just outright prototype bikes designed for the professionals with little concern for whether they sell or not. If they do sell, it'll be an added bonus.
Right.
But dedicated aero bikes for the pros, sort of prototype formula approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, which makes sense.
I mean, for me, it's obviously still early days and things are going to continuously improve. But looking at that Colnago, for example, I mean, it's not something I could think of too many consumers I'd want to recommend that to. And from a mechanic point of view, it kind of, it looks like one of the worst solutions. Is we're already complaining about the difficulty in fitting bikes and the need to replace an entire handlebar and stem and reroute, or basically rebuild a bike if the stem length is wrong. That looks even worse. So I think it's. Yeah, I mean, are we about to see bikes get potentially worse for consumers?
But there's so many consumers that also want this kind of bike.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I think nobody cares about your "per me, I'm a mechanic" story, Dave. No. I think everybody just wants to go faster.
Yeah. I feel like the days of complaining about internal routed bikes are past. It's stupid. Every bike is that way. It's not actually that hard to work on.
Yeah.
Are there downsides? Yes. But I don't know. It's not going away.
Yeah, fair. So do we think these new, well, they're no longer new, but do we think these rulings that allow such different tube shaping, do we think we're going to have some bikes that are terrible again, that ride quality goes completely out the window because they've chased stiffness and full aero?
I don't think so, though, because everyone's running bigger tires. The previous aero bikes from 5 or so years ago, everyone was still on 23s or 25s. And now people are on 28s, 30s, and then even sometimes 32. That does a lot for compliance. I don't think the frame ride quality matters as much, particularly for a race bike.
Yeah, okay. I would still argue that regardless of the tire that is a spring, then the frame still counts. But maybe to your point, maybe the tires do enough that it gives the brands excuses not to have to chase that comfort elsewhere.
I think you're approaching this from the wrong direction. I think we're going to have too much lateral compliance and too high a failure rate. And I don't know if it's happened already and we're over that because it has been 5 years since these rules were introduced, or if that's still yet to come. But getting back to what I was saying earlier, you can make it thinner, you can make it lighter, you can make it more aerodynamic, but making that it won't also just break that's where engineers and designers and that earn their money, really. That's the hard part.
Yeah, I think for me, I think the example there is if you look at all the really thin seat stayed bikes and how on occasion we see a wreck, either in a group ride or in the World Tour, you see a wreck and it's often the seat stay that goes missing or gets cracked. So maybe that'll apply to other tubes in the bike. But Zach?
I mean, I feel like we kind of went through that, though. A few years ago, there would be a crash in a race and bikes would just be in a million pieces. And watching bike racing now, there's still a lot of crashes, and like most of the time people get up and jump on their bike and it's not completely in half. Right. So I feel like maybe we've made bikes a bit stronger too.
I was less thinking about crashing and just thinking about like fatigue
Just like,
failures.
right. Which like for a World Tour team, like who cares? The bike has to work for a season or not even.
Yeah.
Like,
do you get many like bikes coming in that the owner didn't realize there was a crack in the seat tube or something, and then you go, do you know this thing is actually written off?
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely seen that over the years for sure, right? Like, oh, this chainstay's cracked, and it's probably been cracked for like years and has been fine, but obviously it's not good.
Fine so far.
Yeah.
It hasn't broke yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yet.
Yeah. What strikes me is that there is a little bit of hypocrisy. I mean, there always is with the UCI, right? But in these rules, like they brought in the combination of like cyclocross and road frames in an effort to, I guess the pitch was kind of like reduce barriers to entry for cycling, make it, you know, improve the quality of it and all that. And at the same time, we're kind of going in a very different direction with these aero rules, where like these bikes are going to have to be increasingly expensive because of the more complex shapes and manufacturing methods and materials having to be used. And it feels like, yeah, on one hand, the UCI is trying to make the entry to the sport more welcoming, and then on the other hand, we're sort of getting back to the original super bikes that they once banned as part of the Laguna Charter.
Right. They like want it to be super traditional in all these ways, but then now the bikes are just going to get more and more crazy fast bike, like not normal people bikes.
Yeah. So I guess my question to you, Ronan, is: are we back to square one with pre-1996 super bikes?
I think the mistake we're making there is thinking that the UCI can actually influence those things. No, I mean that with in the UCI's, not in their credit, definitely not. But I mean to give them some leeway. You know, it doesn't matter if you try to make cycling more accessible through these rules, or if you try to curb aerodynamic development. What's going to happen is if you give engineers a problem, they're going to work a way around it, or they're going to figure out a way to solve it. And so regardless of what you do with the aerodynamic rules, the other big thing that the UCI want to do is try to make the access to technology fair and equitable for all. But, you know, regardless of what you do with the rules to try and achieve that, there will just be some engineers who work that out better than others. And every time you change the rules, gives those better engineers with more resources and more backing behind them more opportunity to find new ways to optimize around new rules, which the people we're trying to change the rules to favor do not have the resources to deliver on, and thus have to wait to copy those who do have the resources. So I think every time you change the regulations, you just empower the people you're trying to regulate against even further.
I mean, it's like the budgets of the R&D for various bike companies is vastly different. Like a Specialized versus a
felt.
Days, a felt. It's like something like a smaller, big, or like a DeRosa or something, right? Like the aerodynamics and R&D and all of that is just like astronomically huge. And like that's not really going to be fair if that's what the UCI is trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I mean, it's a nice idea. It's just almost impossible to pull off.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to move us on, but before I do, to summarize, I think bikes are going to get significantly worse and more expensive and less durable. And Ronan and Zach are all for it.
But like, define worse. Worse could mean faster, and then that's better for someone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like worse, it's
they didn't even get the best bit, in that all these rules came about because manufacturers were pushing for more clarity. And here we are 4 or 5 years later, and they are really no further forward. They still find themselves in situations where they're arguing with the UCI over the UCI's flip-flopping on the interpretation of their own rules. And so it's been nice, but it hasn't really, other than how bikes look, it hasn't changed much for the people who wanted these rules changes to start with.
Yeah. I would say it's benefited the industry in more freedoms for design and to create new product that is very different to the previous product. But perhaps it's, more than that, I don't know, questionable what it's achieved. All right. Well, let's move on from talking incredibly high-priced super bikes to Shimano's most entry-level group sets. This is quite the transition. Shimano's just announced new CUES and ESSA. Introduced a few years ago. They were for mountain bike and sort of flat bar, like hybrid sort of bikes. Entry levels designed to replace things like Shimano's Altus, Acera, and Olivia groups, which, as far as Shimano goes, like this is actually their bulk of their sales. Like this is the main market for them. This is like probably their cash cow in a sense. And you'll probably find that the higher end groups, while worth more, the quantities are just much, much lower. But yeah, CUES was a full revamp of that, more than a decade in the works. And the news here is that they've introduced CUES for dropbar. So new dropbar levers and shifters and cranks and a front derailleur that works with existing CUES cassettes and rear derailleurs. Zach, you probably don't see bikes at this price point too often, given that you run a high-end workshop in Boulder. But have you played with CUES?
I was just trying to think, and I don't think I've actually ever seen it on a bike.
Yeah,
but the idea of it all does make sense because, historically, with Shimano's lower tier stuff, like cross compatibility is always an issue. And it's usually like someone brings a bike in that's, I don't know, 10 years old or something, and they've crashed and the derailleur's broken or the shifter wore out, and you have to find a shifter. And you're like, okay, which one of these 15 shifters is compatible with this derailleur? And this kind of seems to streamline that. It's not backwards compatible, which that's kind of a problem. But going forward, it seems like a smart idea.
Correct. Yeah. Moving forward, it streamlines it. Moving backwards, it complicates it because it's just yet another thing that isn't compatible. Right. But yeah, I guess just to give some background on CUES, basically it's built around Shimano's Link Glide system, which uses an 11-speed chain, which the construction of those chains are more durable than like earlier speed editions like 8, 9, 10, just based on how the inner links and plates work together and the materials used. And then the cog teeth, the cassette teeth are actually wider. So there's a wider base for increased stiffness and revised shifting ramp. So Shimano claim about three times the drivetrain durability out of Link Glide versus previous Hyperglide systems. And yeah, initially it was designed for e-bikes, like more price point e-bikes, but they've since moved it out into regular bikes. And keeping in mind that it's all an 11-speed chain, there are 9, 10, and 11-speed cassette options. And because it's the 11-speed chain, and because that means the cog spacing is the same, it means the cable pull ratio, regardless of whether it's 9, 10, or 11-speed, is all consistent. So you can grab like an 11-speed shifter and make it work with a 9-speed cassette. So that's where all the cross-compatibility comes from, and the sort of simplification of the system comes from.
Dave, can I get you to speak my language for a second?
Yes, please.
Does this replace Sora? Is this below Sora? Is this above? Where does it sit? Tiagra,
sorry,
all those?
That's a very good point. It replaces Sora. It's also going to replace Claris, depending on how you look at it. The ESSA version, which is 8-speed, might actually be the replacement for Claris. Rumor has it it's not going to replace Tiagra. Tiagra is going to remain in the name. It's apparently a pretty strong name for Shimano, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see that update to something else. And maybe backfill some lacking other group sets that are not in the market anymore. But yeah, I think this is designed specifically, replace Sora on the road, but more importantly, and perhaps a bigger market for Shimano now, is entry-level gravel bikes. Because the entry-level road bike market is kind of being killed off largely by the versatility of gravel bikes. So this is going to be at a price point even lower than what GRX hits, but also replacing, probably phasing out that GRX sort of 10-speed level moving forward. Zach?
And this stuff is, just to be clear too, this stuff is primarily designed for like an OE group set? Yeah,
correct. So yeah, Shimano's not planning to sell CUES as like aftermarket group sets. You will obviously be able to get spare parts, but it's mainly that. It's just coming on complete bikes. So, and the announcement from Shimano is that these complete bikes are likely going to start trickling out in the next few months. So they just wanted to make sure that, you know, their OE partners weren't releasing bikes on it with a group set no one knows about. So yeah, you can expect bikes. I've seen the list. It's got the names of like Specialized, Trek, Giant, Marin, Surly, Salsa, a few others are on the list as far as bikes to expect in the next few months with this stuff.
Looking through it, the thing that stood out to me was the brake calipers, flat mount, but without adapters.
So it was like native size, to 160 mil.
Yeah, exactly. Which I thought that was kind of cool. The calipers look sweet, and also it'll be interesting to see if maybe that moves towards the higher end road stuff.
Yeah, that's an interesting one that you bring up, because so just some background, like the flat mount standard was based on, if you put it onto most frames, it would then fit a 140 mil rotor, and then you typically add an adapter that spaces out 20 mil to a 160 mil rotor. For me, I'm starting to see some frames natively be 160.
Yeah.
So does that then mean you'd have to run a 180 rotor with these calipers?
I guess, yeah. Up front, at least.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's going to be I can't think of a word that isn't a sweary word for mechanics. So yeah, it's definitely going to confuse a few. Yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, I guess I'm jumping all over the place with this, but yeah, in addition to being 9, 10, and 11 speed options, there's also 1x and 2x options for this group set. And yeah, there's obviously the 9 speed's the cheapest, the 11 speed's the most expensive in the range. But yeah, it looks good. I think from memory, the 9 speed stuff is like mechanical brakes, and then the 10 and 11 speed stuff has hydraulic brake options. So,
Dave, is the crank the same across the actual crank arm, the same across the entire range, or does that differ? The press release, it wasn't exactly clear on it.
I think there's a few different levels, because I know that the top end version, yet again, Shimano's not doing short length cranks. 170 mil is the shortest. Asking. And then there's a heavier, cheaper crank that is available in a 165, which feels awfully similar to what Shimano's done with GRX, where it's like that 800 series at Ultegra level GRX. If you want less than a 170 mil crank, I'm sorry, they don't do it. And then if you want cheap, heavy cranks, then you can get your short cranks. So yeah, I was surprised to see them make that. Well,
it's probably just because the cheap, heavy cranks, they can just drill holes. They're not hollow crank arms.
Yes. Yeah.
When you say shorter cranks, 165 is the shortest there, which by today's standards is not very short.
No. I mean, historically, Shimano just follows where OE demand is, right? So for me, them not having a shorter crank just means that none of their OE partners are requesting them. Do you agree, disagree?
I think it's a chicken or an egg situation. It's like the entire market does want them, but none of the market options come with shorter cranks.
Does the entire market want them?
Or I'm speaking in generalities.
Like if you're buying a $1,500 bike, do you care?
No, I mean, if you're buying this bike to be your winter bike, or you're buying it to be your gravel, your introduction into gravel or something like that, you're coming from a road background, and you've already got moved to shorter cranks, or you're short crank curious, if that's a thing, and you're buying a new bike and you're thinking, well, you know what, I'll get shorter cranks on my new bike. If it's not an option, then I just wonder which needs to come first. Is it like everybody I speak to is telling me that they can't find shorter cranks? They're out of stock everywhere. Shops are telling me they can't get them. But when you talk to the industry, you don't seem to get the same response. It's like, oh, we don't see the demand. So I don't know which side of that is accurate, but I would. I think it kind of gets to the same question with the rim brake. It's like everybody wants to see rim brake survive, but nobody wants to pay for rim brake. So it's the same thing. Everybody wants short crank arms, but they don't want to pay for them. And,
I mean, the industry too as a whole is kind of slow to react to these kind of things.
Yeah,
I think that's what's actually happening. Yeah, if I was giving my opinion.
Yeah, I also think there's probably some kind of price incentive for, rather than speccing a different crank length for every frame size you do, if you just blanketly picked a 170 mil crank for like your bottom 4 or 5 sizes, there probably is some sort of price incentive in doing so, like economies of scale versus I mean, I personally think like the smallest bikes out in the market, like your extra small, should be on 160 or 165 cranks as a stock option, but we're still not seeing that commonly.
That is starting. That is starting.
Unless it's new CUES.
Yes. We got slightly off topic. The other question I was going to ask you, Dave, was just, do you even think these cranks will come on CUES equipped bikes? Because every Sora Claris spec bike that I've ever bought has always had a non-series crank on it, and usually not from Shimano.
Yeah, there's always been price incentives, right? There's always been a few dollars to save by putting an FSA or some other crank rather than the Shimano.
Some other crank that you have to get a blowtorch to remove.
Does this chain on this group set require like special teeth profile on the chainring?
No, it's a normal 11-speed chain, like existing, very standard 11-speed chain. So
I thought the link glide was that the cassette?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, okay, so it's just the cassette that's different in link glide, but the chain is like you could just take a regular off-the-shelf 11-speed chain, put it on this, which is really cool. Yeah, I don't know, Ron. I think my guess is probably on the one-by configurations we'll see more aftermarket cranks because you don't need a shift on them, and I think there has been quite a bit of market move towards using like Shimano rings just because they do work that much better than a lot of cheaper alternatives. So I'd like to say we're going to see the Shimano cranks in 2-by configurations and maybe not in the 1-by, but time will tell. I agree that is normally the first place brands go to save a few dollars is the crank, and then they
it's because cranks these days cost as much as a group set did 20 years ago.
Yeah, true that. Anyway, I think Suvi has actually written up all about Shimano CUES. So if you want to know the details, given I butchered them so much, you can head to Escape Collective, read all about them, see some photos of this stuff. Expect to see this on a heap of bikes coming out in the next few years. There's going to be a transition period where, like, say, GRX 10-speed is going to continue in the market for some time. So yeah, this 2025, 26 bikes, you'll probably find a bit of a mix in the range, but moving forward, this Shimano CUES stuff is going to be around for a while, so keep an eye out for it. Moving on, another thing that Suvi wrote about earlier in this week, and that she's been sort of working on almost since she started at Escape, is this comparison of mid-tier road pedals. So she found, sort of starting with like a Shimano 105, she found the most price comparable in time, look, and speed play, and then spent the last few months sort of doing back-to-back testing on these, and has written it up in this pretty extensive write-up. And a part of that write-up that stood out to me, and there's a whole section dedicated to it, is sort of like the serviceability of these pedals. And when you really look at it, the Shimano is, in my opinion, the only serviceable pedal there, because while the look and time pedals claim to be serviceable, really you need to like just replace the entire axle unit, which contains the bearings within it. And some of these require special tools that you then have to send back to like a time service center or something to have this done. There are sneaky ways to get into the pedals, but really not. And then the new Speedplay, which are now owned by Wahoo rejigged those pedals, redesigned them, and made them non-serviceable. So I guess, what's been on my mind is
Wahoo made them not require servicing.
Right. Sorry for that.
Because bearings last forever.
Very good distinction, Ronan. Which brings me to my point, and what's been on my mind is that non-serviceable road pedals are dumb. Discuss.
I think serviceable, but like not requiring service all the time. Like previous speed plays, you had to pump full of grease all the time.
Yeah.
Or like a Crank Brothers, you have to service it like once a week. So I want like serviceable, but not requiring service frequently.
Durable, but fixable is, I think.
So basically just ride Shimano's.
Well, this is the thing, because everybody knows I like Speedplay, I ride Speedplay.
Yeah.
I never minded. I had the gun to do it. I never minded doing the grease.
But the amount of people
service.
that don't.
The amount of people that don't is a problem, but I can't control what people don't people don't do what they should do. But my point is that was easy to do. There was a Phillips head screwdriver, undo the screw, pump in some grease, twist it around until it comes out the other side, put back on the cap. With Shimano servicing, I mean, it is possible, but you're like,
most takes people 5 minutes max.
I know it takes 5 minutes unless you drop like the ball bearings all over the place.
Well,
and
don't do that.
I don't do that. But my point is that one of these you can easily do at home. Anybody could do it. You have to have a gun, fair enough. The other, a lot of people will feel they need to bring it to their bike shop to get that done.
Yeah, the Shimano system, I think, scares people because you're taking the axle unit out, but it actually is very simple. Like, it's actually not all that different in practice to what you'd do with the old Speedplay pedal, where you're pumping grease through. You're just removing the axle, putting grease into the body, and then that's basically pushing the old grease back out the end as you reinstall the axle. So, like Zach saying it's 5 minutes is true, and at least for most pedals. I'd say the Dura-Ace pedal's the exception to that. The Dura-Ace pedal's a little bit trickier to service. But
I just have a barometer for all this stuff. It's like, can my dad do it himself, or does he need to bring it to me? And
fair.
With Speedplay, I'm not involved. Or the old Speedplay, I'm not involved. With the Shimano pedals, I am.
I've heard from other people that they kind of get satisfaction out of the greasing of old Speedplay pedals. Did you enjoy the task?
There's a certain thrill to it, all right, so I have to admit.
Yeah. Just sort of, seeing the old grease sort of ooze out there's something comforting about it. Anyway, we're going down a rabbit hole.
You're into
here.
the other thing that was on your mind all week.
Yeah, moving on. All right. So I guess with this conversation is if there is only one pedal on the market that is truly serviceable, which is Shimano, Speedplay arguably used to be. It's no longer. Is that important? Do you think that is a decision that people should be factoring into their purchase?
My only complaint with this is Shimano pedals are great, but usually, at least around here, like we ride our road bikes on a lot of dirt roads.
Yep.
I wear the pedal body out on a Shimano before the bearings. Like the bearings still perfectly fine, no play, spin freely, but the like toe part of the pedal body wears out.
Because it's no longer metal.
Correct. Yeah, which they've not made those in a long time. And that would be I wish that Shimano would sell just pedal bodies.
I think we're about to arrive to there is no perfect pedal conclusion, because that's my complaint with the new Wahoo Speedplays as well, is that they added the cap to the pedal body to stop the wear issue that you have with previous Speedplays, which was a genuine issue, regardless of how well you serviced them.
Pump the grease in.
The pedal body still wore out, and that has been solved, but now you can't service them going forward. And while I haven't needed to service them so far, bar all the ones that failed right at the very start, if and when that day does come, it can't be done.
Right. Have you heard of anyone wearing the bearings out in the new Wahoo pedals?
There's some like Wait Weenies post or something way back in the back of my mind, but I can't exactly pull it. I can't remember if it was just a question or if it was an incident. But if it was, that's the only one I can recall ever hearing about it.
Yeah. So maybe it isn't needed.
I mean, my experience so far is that, when I reviewed those pedals back in 2022, I had a year of failing pedals. I've had 2 sets of them since that haven't failed yet. And so it's gone on for 3 years of continuous use without issue. And I mean,
it's a pretty good track record.
You wouldn't have got 3 years out of the original Speedplays without pumping some grease into them.
No. The only thing that would be nice with the new ones is particularly the Aero ones from a performance standpoint. If you could pump in like a thinner race day grease, that would be nice.
I've seen Detailed Bike Tech on Instagram race tune hit some Speedplay pedals for I don't know if it was for Dan Bingham or one of those, but yeah, those are the sort of athletes he typically works with. He does the hour record bikes, and I've seen him fully get into the guts of one and machine special parts and ceramic bearing it, which is very fancy and very cool, but not something you'd normally be able to do. So I guess, the next question on this then is, with that in mind, like what pedal would you be? One, I mean, Ronan, I think you've answered it, and Zach, you said you're using Shimano, but what would you actually be recommending to someone else that they use?
I guess, like, I don't quite understand the point of Look, like why you would want a Look pedal over a Shimano. Like, it's essentially the same function and like design and pedal cleat stability and all of that, but the bearings don't last as long and the cleats don't last as long.
Yep.
Like, I don't understand why that would be a choice.
I agree with you. Yep.
Like, Time is a very, like, you either love Times and you've ridden them for a decade, or you're curious, I guess. But like, definitely a much smaller market with Time. So to me, it's like Shimano is kind of the obvious choice here.
Yeah, Time. Just like to clarify that, like, Time has a very different feel to it. Like, there's a much more natural float to it, and some people absolutely love it. It's a much more free float in it, but others don't necessarily get on with it. But I guess that's the big difference there.
I haven't ridden Time in 20 years, so I can't really comment on that. I want to bring my dad into it again, because originally I put him on Speedplay because they're easier to get into. They're like dual-sided entry. But if I had to recommend a single platform, it's probably more so for cleat setup is Shimano. Just
it's just so easy. Like, Speedplay, the cleat setup is so fiddly.
It is so fiddly. I will say that if you get like a proper 4-bolt pair of shoes, it transforms it from being the worst to set up to being the best.
Which is like,
but
0 shoes on the market.
North Wave is probably the most prominent. It's with an adapter. It's not a true 4-bolt. But
and like Lake make them. Yeah, there's a handful, but like primarily, no one has shoes that are 4-bolt.
No, this is true.
Yeah.
And as for Look and why it exists, like, we have a saying in Ireland: "Ah, sure, look it." And it's basically like a way to end the conversation, because there is no explanation, or there is no "ah, sure, look it," isn't that it? So I think that's
Yeah,
It
sounds
fits
great.
with the look being in it.
Yep.
Ronan, if you didn't care about the aero benefits, would you still run speed
If
play?
I had a choice, I'd run Shimano. It's not
Yeah,
my choice
okay.
to do speed play. It's a compelling thing within me that I can't. Yeah. And it's nothing to do with aero.
Hang on, you got to explain this.
It's just that I footer with my cleats.
Who's
that
forcing
much.
you to run speed play?
Myself.
Why?
I just like the adjustment. I like that you have so much. You
Okay.
can get pinpoint float adjustment and angle adjustment and like left right setup but yeah,
All right.
triangular cleats I can just never get, whether it's Look or Shimano or what. I can never get them set up that I feel comfortable. It's like I want to move it a tiny bit to the left, and then like you move the angle moves, or you can't move it left because the angle you're at has already maxed out how far you can move it, and
Yeah. Anyway, check out Suvi's article if you're keen on pedals of this price point. There's plenty to consider and a lot of similarities. There's nuance in it. Summarize, Zach, you and I both prefer the Shimano SPD SL system, but we kind of wish that the pedal bodies were more durable. Ronan, you're locked into speed play because of the
I'm a prisoner
ability to micro.
against my own will. But
Yep. Okay. Because of the ability to fine tune fit things that you seem to do every single ride. And then, I guess time, consider them if you want something with like a real free float to it. It is actually quite a nice system. Just know that the bearing systems aren't durable. And then pick those if you want a pedal where the bearings and the pedal bodies wear out faster than all the other pedals. All right, it's been a busy week in the small products tech front, so let's cover some of these things in our quick tech bites. First on the list, Ritchey for 3 decades has put sort of the world champions rainbows on its WCS components, and that is no longer. That is coming to an end. They are moving to grey based on what sounds like a final cease and desist letter from UCI, who owns the trademark on those colors. But that trademark came far after Ritchey first started using it. Anyway, thoughts?
I think it's a good thing. I feel like the other, like, it just looked a bit dated.
Yeah, okay.
And like, not everyone wants World Champ logo on their bike.
It might actually help their sales.
I'm kind of with Zach and
Yeah.
I looked at Ritchey parts so often, thought those are beautiful, except that rainbow part, which wouldn't match the rest of the beautiful bike I'm trying to assemble. Hence why I'm.
I mean, like, to be fair, most of their stuff you could take acetone to and take the logo off, but still.
Yeah. All right.
I don't know.
So
I think it's a good thing.
Okay, so we don't hate the UCI for this.
I still kind
I
of.
mean, yeah, it's a
Okay.
stupid thing.
All right.
But I think it's a good product or change. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
Presumably, this means that when you see a World Champs Edition bike for sale, that means that manufacturer has licensed the rainbow from the UCI.
I believe so, yes.
So the UCI is literally building a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
That was the whole problem here, is that Ritchey had never paid for the licensing because they'd used it before they needed to, and I guess they weren't willing to pay whatever exorbitant price the UCI was demanding that they do pay. So, but yeah, I mean, there are other examples out there that clearly other brands are happy to pay this fee.
I mean, there's a bike shop here in town that they got a cease and desist letter from the UCI because they were selling a T-shirt that had an old team car with World Champ stripes on it.
Yep.
That was
Cycling
fun.
Tips got the same for a T-shirt they once did. And
Is it like again? I don't want to defend the UCI, but it's part of my job to like be able to bring in different positions and into my head and consider them all. Is it maybe a factor that
argue with yourself?
Yeah, I like to do that a lot. Or I don't like to do it, but I do it a lot. Is it one of those where the UCI don't use the trademark they have, they lose it? Where if you let people use something you've got trademarked and you don't defend it, then you effectively lose the right to defend it?
I am not a lawyer.
Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, there is the case with like generic terms, like the old Band-Aid or Hoover or Kleenex or whatever generic term you want to use, where that can happen. I don't know if it applies to like trademarked colors and logos, but potentially. But I would say someone the likes of Ritchey don't have the finances to argue that point.
I feel like too, if you're a company and you have the current World Champ, that should get you a pass. Like, you can make a world champ bike next year and sell it without this. Like, if you get a world champ on your team, then that's a big deal. Like, you should not have to then license the world's champ stripes.
Yeah, but I think it's probably dangerous territory for the UCI, where it's like the 15 brands that person sponsors them could then blatantly use the world champ. I think they do still have to control it. So anyway, expect Ritchey stuff to now be monochrome moving forward. And yeah. Also a new brand on the market is coming from the founders of Rotor, QO Cranks. They're a new brand. They've just released road, gravel, and mountain bike carbon cranksets. Some key features: they go down to 160 millimeter crank lengths. They're all using dub spindles, so that 28.99 mil spindle. And their chainrings, at least in the 2-bike configuration, seem to be compatible with all the major 12-speed drivetrains, which is neat. Their road crank has speed dimples in it, which is I'm
going to stop you, Dave.
Take that as you will.
I'm going to stop. I have to stop you. Can't let you go any further.
All right, go on.
Dimples on one side for aerodynamic effect, and then just like huge recesses on the other side for stiffness. It's like, yeah.
Are you saying this is just marketing, Ronan?
I don't think the stiffness enhancing elements on the rear are marketing, but I think the dimples on the front facing side may well be a marketing gimmick, dare I say.
No, I think this is the next frontier in going faster.
Dimpled cranks.
I actually think it's been done before. I mean, obviously, I would say this is much more a visual distinction than anything that they could claim could be measured. Is my take on it. But anyway, weight wise, their top end road crank's about 60 grams lighter than a Dura-Ace, but about 70 grams heavier than a SRAM Red. So yeah, just a lot of slots in the middle, not super light, not too heavy.
I feel like it's similar to the Look pedal thing. Is like, what in the market is this? Like, what gap is it filling? Like, they're not offering different crank lengths. They're not offering power. Like, the chainrings probably aren't going to shift as well. And like OE crank spec is also less and less these days because of proprietary drivetrain parts. Like, to me, I don't understand why this product necessarily. Like, what are they offering that doesn't already exist?
I think with the people behind it,
dimples.
It's probably just the first offer. It's probably just the first thing. So in isolation, it maybe doesn't make sense. But when they build out
so they're going to come out with another hydraulic shifting group set.
they may direct their energies elsewhere this time, but I think there will be a bigger list of products.
Which I'm sure there will, but like, it just seemed like I saw the launch and it just felt very underwhelming, and I'm like, why would I even want this over a rotor crank?
More or less underwhelmed if the dimples hadn't been there.
Oh, or what if I feel like the dimples are quite large. What if they're smaller?
Do we need to explain her why dimples don't work?
Yeah.
Will we
put it a golf ball?
Something else?
No.
Keep it for another day. I'm going to move us on. Also new, Wolftooth had a very cute little mini pump. They had previously released, I think it's 40 and 85 cc versions of its EnCase mini pump, where you can stash either its like a tubeless plug tool or the multi-tool inside the pump, or for the bigger size you can do both. And they've now got a very cute little, even cuter version of it, which is 30cc. It only fits their tubeless plug kit inside of it. But for those looking for a mini pump that's almost the size of like a CO2 canister, Wolftooth has something for you.
I feel like if I got a flat on a trail and I didn't have things to fix a flat, and someone handed me that little pump, I think I would rather just walk home. Like, like, it looks horrendous to actually pump a tire with.
It'll take a while. There's no denying that. Yeah. There's no cheating physics when it comes to mini pumps. So it's if you don't want to carry a big pump, expect to be there a while. Anyway, next on the list, it doesn't look like it's been a good week for smartwatch lovers. There's been a couple of things here. I mean, first on the list, I'd say, is reported by DC Rainmaker, friend of the podcast. Garmin has a number of its models have had a bad GPS file that has been causing quite a few models to wig out. And at the time of recording, I mean, Garmin didn't have a direct fix for it, but there were workarounds to get your watch back online. But yeah, not the first time this has happened to smartwatches.
From what I understand now, it's not just smartwatches though, because Edge head units are also affected by this.
Don't touch your head unit.
Yeah. I just seen. I'm looking into this. I just seen it at the tail end of a different article I was reading today that was focused on smartwatches. But there are a series of suggested fixes. If you've got a Forerunner watch, which most people will have, it does require a full factory reset, which is a bit of a pain. If you have a Fenix watch, which might be relevant to our listeners as well, you can connect it to a PC or Mac and go through Garmin Express and force a restart while connected there. And for Edge head units, which is also very relevant to our audience here, obviously, connecting to a Windows PC and manually deleting a file that I'm not going to mention because I haven't tried this and I don't want anybody to completely destroy their head units.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, it's also very likely that, being connected through Garmin Connect on your mobile will just bring an update that fixes itself. But if it is in this reboot loop, then maybe you need to intervene in order for it to then update. So yeah, doesn't sound great, but it also sounds like it's a sort of issue that's presented itself to Garmin previously and also to a few other brands. So yeah, more a nuisance than something that's wholly new and worrying. And then the other one that I think we won't spend much time on now, but one that we will be digging into in future, I know Suvi is actually investigating this at the moment, is there's been some research into smartwatch bands, and it's been found that a lot of them on the market, a lot of the sweat-resistant bands on the market actually have dangerous levels of PFAS, forever chemicals in them, and the research is showing that they can be absorbed through the skin, and that potentially exercising when you're sweaty, that actually potentially opens up the pores more for more absorption. So that's probably worth a Google search if you're a loyal smartwatch user. Through my limited research this time, it sounds like silicone bands are sort of a safe bet. So or metal bands.
It's been a good week for the ongoing battle I've had with Alex on.
Yes,
he's convinced smartwatches are the future, and I'm convinced they're dumb.
Yeah, Alex is currently working on a opinion piece about why he loves smartwatches, and Ronan's just been sending him links to these articles. It's been great. All right, next on the list, this one is something that fascinated me, and Zach, I am sure you have opinions on this. CeramicSpeed have a new tool that is designed specifically for removing stuck crank bolts. So, I mean, we can just kind of call it. I mean, this is really designed for like SRAM dub cranks where the bolts seem to get not so much seized, but galled in place where the bolt reaches its sort of like elastic threshold and gets jammed in there. And yeah, CeramicSpeed have created this thing that uses the press head off their bottom bracket press, and it then winds onto a threaded rod that kind of pulls an Allen key against a dummy pedal. So you thread this pedal shaft into where your pedal goes, and then you basically are pressing down with a thread until the crank pops free. I like it. I don't think it's necessary. I think there's many other methods you can do to get a crank off, but I think as far as wanting to take a crank off smoothly with the bike in a work stand without any risk of hurting yourself, I like this. But Zach, thoughts?
It's cool. It's great.
Yeah,
but I would never use it. Not even price. Like I would never use it on a day-to-day basis in the shop.
Because
like it's slow. It's too slow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for a travel mechanic, fantastic. Like,
agreed.
I would for sure put one of those in my case if I was doing race mechanic stuff.
Yeah.
But I think for day to day, it's just too slow. It looks like. Yeah,
I fully agree with that. I've got no arguments against that. I'd say the idea of it is very similar to the constricting of an inner tube between the hex key and the pedal, something we've covered on the podcast before, something I've written about before. And actually, when I first covered that, CeramicSpeed actually reached out and teased me with this tool, being like, "Oh, we've been working on a similar idea, but with a thread." For me, that inner tube method actually does work, and it is something that I'd probably consider doing it if I was like in the field and couldn't get a crank off. But I actually find it super tiring to do. Like every time I've tried it, you're adding tension to this inner tube, and you're kind of like working up a sweat because you have to add so much tension to the inner tube for it to be effective. And then even then, I've had a few cranks that still required me to like intervene and push the hex key toward the pedal manually, even once it was fully wrapped in the inner tube. So it's a solution. But yeah, I think the CeramicSpeed tool is pretty cool, but it does also highlight that there is a problem with those cranks if another company is making a solution to get a crank off.
I'm honestly surprised it took someone this long to make a tool for this.
Yeah. I mean, it's been an issue that's been around for a few years. And as a reminder, if you've got a stuck dub crank, the best fix is a steel bolt. Replace that aluminium bolt with a steel one, and it's 15 grams heavier or something, but it much easier to get off after that. It doesn't deform as much under torque. So, also new, there's a new bike, State, which is based pretty much exclusively within the United States. They're like a price point brand, consumer direct brand. They have a new $1,000 all-road bike, the 4130 steel, 4130 steel. They get the price point down by using like their own brand of drivetrain, for example, which is effectively like a rebranded like sensor drivetrain, which is the sort of stuff you'd find on AliExpress. They've now upgraded the brakes to like a mechanical hydraulic brake. Though the previous brakes, I tested them on a field test at Cycling Tips and ended up crashing as a result of those useless brakes. So it's good they've upgraded the brakes. And yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I would say you still get what you pay for at these price points. There normally are corners cut, but $1,000 for a whole gravel bike with 12-speed shifting. I mean, that's quite a lot of bike. But yeah, I would also say just their quality is typically aligned to the price from what I've seen.
I also saw it was almost 30 pounds.
Nice. So without pedals, probably.
Yeah, that's a lot of bike.
Yep.
Zach,
yep.
I'm going to ask you the same question as I asked Dave earlier. Can you speak to me in my language, please?
Yes.
30 pounds is 13.6
Divide
kilos.
2.2.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 13.6 kilos.
It's not light. So yeah, but
it's like, yeah, for a bike with no suspension or anything, that's a very heavy bicycle.
That's 2 bicycles.
Yes.
Yeah.
For me, I look at this $1,000 and they're like selling it, upgraded to 12 speed. I wish it weren't. I think it'd be a much better bike if it was like 10 or 11 speed and less finicky to adjust. I think,
and it would have one less gear.
Yeah, I think mechanical hydraulic brakes are interesting, but they can be quite terrible if not set up correctly. And yeah, I mean, as mentioned, I have seen some quality control issues with their rims, and I've seen some stuff with their forks and frames as well. So just, yeah, a lot of bike for the money. Do consider it if you're on a strict budget or someone that's on a strict budget. But yeah, you also get what you pay for. So anyway, moving on. Lucky last is the biggest tech news of the week. This is pretty major. You sitting down, Ronan? Sitting down, Zach? Chris King have updated their headset-based coffee tampers.
Oh, I did see that.
What?
Yeah.
The purple one? Ooh, so good.
Yeah. So they're now optimized for more efficiency. You could say also if you put them in a wind tunnel, Ronan, they'd be more aerodynamic.
Is this because of the UCI rules, the relaxation and the design rules, that this has been possible?
I don't think so. No, I think these are exempt of that. But yeah, I think they really optimized it by shortening the length, so you more efficiently closer to the task.
They've altered the aspect ratio.
So like open up the wrist angle.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, they currently only do them in a 58 millimeter diameter, so it's not for all coffee enthusiasts. But yeah, if you want one of these, it's $150 to have a Chris King headset tamper your coffee.
What does like a normal nice tamper cost?
They get up to this price for sure. I've seen some nice like wooden ones and stuff get easily up into this price, but I mean that it's still very premium, given that you can probably get a price, a plastic one at Walmart or your equivalent convenience store for $5, $10. So yeah, not for the faint heart, but for those that want that little bit of cycling convenience, lifestyle, and something to put next to your Park Tool pizza cutter, it's probably worth looking at. Speaking of, what cycling related things do you have in your kitchen?
I have a lot of bottle openers, but the best bottle opener I have...
Oh, yes.
Well, I mean, obviously I've got the Campagnolo corkscrew, and that's the best for opening wine, but it's too big and awkward to take out of the cupboard that it's buried in, so it never actually gets used. I also don't drink wine, but in terms of beer bottle openers, the best one I have is a Zip branded one.
Oh, see, I disagree. I think the Weira screwdriver handled bottle opener is
I
the
have
best.
that one too, and that's the one I use all the time.
Ah.
But the zip one gives me a better
Interesting.
engagement and better, yeah. But it's
Okay.
flat and it's narrow, so it like falls down the back of the drawer. The wear one just easier to grab.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Dave, do you have the Abbey one?
Which one?
I think it was a CT one.
Yes,
Yeah,
of course. I
one's sweet.
have a few of those. Yes.
Yeah.
I commissioned those.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I've worn one of those out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a 7 one that's really cool. That it's like a piece of probably like seat stay that
Oh, yeah.
they then like drilled part of it away, and then that was
that
pretty
is
cool
cool.
one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now for me, the Wearer keeps returning, keeps taking the prime place. I think it's a well-made tool. So
I just don't feel that
Anyway.
the engagement with the cap is as good as with the handle. Is the
Yeah,
handle
that's
is
fair.
great.
It's not as sharp.
Yeah,
yeah.
Maybe the Australian caps are different from the Irish caps.
yeah. You have a lot of screw caps in Australia. I remember that much.
Yeah, I'm also the wrong person because I don't drink beer, but I do open. I
Just
do
open
drink a
them for
lot
the
of
fun.
fancy tonic water.
You just
So,
open your beer
so,
to
yeah.
use a Wearer tool, isn't that what it is?
Yeah, no, I just use fancy imported tonic water instead, and then that lets me wear through bottle openers. So, yeah. Anyway, all right, that's the news for this week, and also our thoughts on bottle openers. Strangely enough, that leads us into Ask a Wrench. Zach, you're not joining us this week because Brad and I pre-recorded this, but you will be joining us in future weeks on Ask a Wrench. So we'll have yourself and Brad and myself for Ask a Wrench. But with that, it is now member only. So to keep listening, if you're on the free feed, you're about to hit the end of the episode. But if you're not on the free feed and you're on the member feed, you will hear Ask a Wrench. And if you'd like to become a member, please head to escapecollective.com/join. And yeah, if you are working in the industry or you're a mechanic, we do have special rates for you. You'll find the answers to those in our FAQ on our website. And if you are a member and you're not on the free feed, then it's just a few easy steps to get set up to get onto the free feed. Head to your account on our website and you'll find a link on how to do it. It really is quite quick to do through most podcast players. And just to give you a tease, if you're on the free feed, this week, Brad and I will discuss and answer some member submitted questions related to modern drivetrain compatibility and brakes and whether they're the reason that we're seeing a convergence between mountain bike and road tech. We answer a question regarding sweating tubeless tires and what to do about it. And then we answer a question related to using multiple wheel sets across a single bike. The question relates to brake performance and brake setup, and we dive into all the best practices there, including getting a bit distracted and going down a rabbit hole on best practices for rotor bed-in and brake bed-in and similar. So yeah, that's what you're missing out on if you're not on the member feed. All right, well, that's a wrap on the episode. And yeah, I mean, Ronan, any pieces on Escape Collective that you think people should be checking out? What's happened this week? What do you think are must-reads?
I think for me this week it has to be Suvi's mid-range pedal comparison piece. I mean, not least for the amount of discussion it prompted on this podcast, but also just because it's a real in-depth look at those pedals. Yeah,
a common price point. Yeah, for sure. I think, for me, there's just so much tech content coming, and we've got a proper team now. We've got even another person starting next week on the tech front, and so that makes 5 of us full time. So yeah, I think we're publishing a lot. Typically like up to 2 tech pieces a day. So definitely
tell us
jump
if it's
on
too
the
much. We
website
can take some time off.
if you don't.
No problem.
Yes, exactly. That's what it's all about. But yeah, I think in addition to having things like Ask a Wrench, bonus episodes on Geek Warning, more episodes coming, and so much content. If you're not a member, chances are you're missing out. So with that, I'll say goodbye, farewell. Please leave us feedback. Let us know what you think of the changes. Good or bad, let us know. Until next week, cheers.